I'm going to talk about plant pests and diseases. I'm going to focus on crops because that's more my area. Then I'll finish and tell you a little bit about trees. I'm going to start with this, a plate of food. Most of us take it completely for granted. I hope by the end of the lecture you'll think about it a little bit more the next time you have a meal. This is a really nice balanced diet. We've got the carbohydrates in the rice, we've got meat, and we've got vegetables. Nice balanced diet. In fact, the government would like us to know what a balanced diet is. A lot of us tend to eat a bit too much of this stuff than we should, and they recommend that we eat about 1/3 carbohydrates, 1/3 vegetables, and then the other third's made up of dairy, of fish and meat, and of all the sweetie, all the naughty things. What most of you might not realise is, with the exception of fish, absolutely everything on there, either directly or indirectly, comes from crops. Not only that, but everything you drink, probably except for water, comes from crops. Coffee and tea, soft drinks, wine and beer, and I know that if one or two of you had a few glasses of plant-based alcoholic beverage yesterday, and whiskey. So, except for fish, everything on there relies on crops being grown. In the UK, we only produce 50% of the crops that we need, of the food that we need, which means actually we're not very food secure. We're quite a rich country, which means we can go and look for it elsewhere, and that's what we do. In fact, we get it from 191 of the other 195 countries in the world. So we get food in one form or another from almost every other country in the world. 30% of that food comes from Europe. So I'm not going to go into Brexit, the pros and cons of Brexit, but actually, you know, we have to take it quite seriously because 1/3 of everything we eat, that's where we get our food. We heard this morning in the pathology practical about the Irish potato famine, 1845 to 48. Some places these days in other parts of the world, but even close to home, sometimes things go wrong and we get famine. The Irish potato famine was a disaster waiting to happen. They had a single staple food, which was potato. It was a single variety. I mean, how crazy is that? But that's what people did 100 years ago, called lumper, really unusual shape, still grown today, doesn't taste very nice, but you can still find it today. And it had absolutely no protection against pests and diseases. And when late blight, Phytophthora disease, came into Ireland at this time, it just went straight through this one variety and it was completely killed, and there was nothing to eat. And as we heard this morning, over 1 million people starved, over 1 million people emigrated. And it's the reason that this one plant pathogen is the reason that Irish people are actually spread, mainly in America, but all over the world today, from this one disease. This is an example of what it looks like. It's still the biggest potato disease in the world. It's probably the biggest plant disease in the world in terms of economics. And you can imagine coming across this in your field 150 years ago, not very nice. In terms of food on a global scale, about 1 in 10 people still don't have enough food. It's a bit sad in modern times when there are still people that don't get enough food. It's just under 1 billion people don't get enough to eat. How sad is that? What's even more sad is that 1/4 of everybody on Earth eats too much and they're overweight, with a number of people, 1 in 10, being obese. So the distribution of the food that we produce is pretty poor on a global scale. The population's increasing. You all know what exponential is. Things are doubling. They go from 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32. Numbers suddenly get very big. So this is the population from 2,000 years ago. In about the 1770s, there was 1 billion people on Earth. 1770s, it's not very long ago. By the mid-1900s, 70 years ago, there were 2 billion people. Today, there's more like 7 billion people. So what's going to happen in another 30 or 40 years? And how are we going to feed all those people? Are we going to feed all those people? And if we're not, what's going to happen to them? What are they going to do? We're at a crunch point where things are getting tough. Look at this. Globally, we need to produce as much food in the next 50 years as we have in the last 10,000 years. So since the very start of agriculture 10,000 years ago, if you take all the food that's ever been produced in the last 10,000 years, that would only last us for 50 years. And if I was to give a lecture, the same lecture in 30 or 40 years' time, I'd probably be saying that that food would last us for 20 years. So we have a real crisis on our hands, and it's getting ever and ever closer. We need to produce at least 50% more food in the next 30 or 40 years. To do that, we need more energy. We need 30% fresh water. Where are we going to find 30% fresh water? And we need a lot more land to grow those crops on, unless we manage to grow more crops in the same space that we've got. In terms of how much farmland is there, half of all the habitable land on Earth is farmland. That means not things like the Antarctic and deserts, but everywhere that people can live. Half of it's farmland, 17 million square miles. It's responsible for about 80% deforestation, and we know how important deforestation is in terms of carbon dioxide levels and things like this. So human beings producing crops are really affecting the balance, the Earth's balance, and we have to do it in a very, very careful way going into the future. It was on the news just 2 days ago. Brazil is cutting down rainforest, virgin rainforest, at a rate of 1 hectare, the size of a football pitch, every minute. I mean, it's unbelievable to imagine that. The size of this room, it would be about 5 seconds that they cut it down. So it's amazing how quickly we're losing trees for agriculture. Of the farmland we do have, most of it's grazing because the land isn't good enough to plant crops, and about 40% crops. Globally, every year, we produce 2.5 billion tons of crops. That's about the weight of a medium-sized mountain. That's human beings doing it. We produce the same weight as a medium-sized mountain. It's incredible how much food we're producing. But nations can't grow food everywhere because a lot of the land is not suitable. And take Scotland as an example, where you get these red and blue dots. Actually, this is potato production, but it's the same for all different crops. Scotland only produces its food right on the edge, right on the eastern edge. And the reason is, if you look at this soil map from the National Soil Archive that we have at the Institute, you can see that the soil that's suitable for crops is right on this edge. Actually, not every country is as fortunate as that, and they get even less land to grow their crops. There are different intensities of crops. You can imagine this being somewhere like the US, high-intensity farming. You have large areas, lots of pesticides and fertilizers. We're using fertilizers up at a frightening rate. So by the end of this century, there'll probably be no more to use. What are we going to do then? Lots of machinery and very big yields. You also get small, low-intensity farming, small areas, few, if any, pesticides and fertilizers, lots of people working a small amount of land and pretty poor yields. But we produce our crops somehow. Economically, agriculture is worth about £2 trillion a year. That's about the same as oil. And they're the two big world economic drivers. So agriculture has as much input into the world economy as oil. It employs about a fifth of everyone on Earth, about 1.4 billion people. This is men and women, and actually women in developing nations do the majority of the agricultural work. And then in terms of economy, in a lot of developing nations like sub-Saharan Africa, most of the economy is down to agriculture and export of the food that they produce. Whereas in more developed nations, America, maybe Europe, it's much less important in terms of the economy. Okay, so what do we do with the crops that we produce? Of all the crops in the world that we produce, we eat about 55% of them directly. That's only half of all the food, all the crops that we produce. A third of them go to animal feed so that we can eat meat and dairy products, etc. The problem with this is the conversion of crop energy into food energy is really poor. So for every 100 kilocalories of crops that go to animal feed, we get about 10 kilocalories out, so 10%. So 90% of a third of all the crops that are grown is just lost because of our taste for meat, and I'm as guilty as other people. In terms of beef, if you had a steak, I'm embarrassed to say I had steak for my lunch today, the conversion's something like 99% loss. So we eat 1% of the energy that goes into making that piece of beef. And then countries like the US and Brazil make biofuels. About 9 or 10% of crops go on biofuels. A little bit of the waste goes to animal feed and then through to us. But we waste a huge amount of crops. 24% of all the food, a quarter of all the food energy that we produce is lost because of our taste for animal products. It's outrageous, actually. About 16% is lost due to wastage, for example, post-harvest storage waste, stuff that we throw away from supermarkets. But by far the biggest loss is due to pests and pathogens. About a third of all the crops that are grown on the world, a third of the mountain that you saw earlier, is lost because of pests and diseases. Take rice as one example. Rice is one of the worst, and something like half of all the rice that's produced in the world, half of everything grown, is lost due to pests and diseases. Imagine how many people you could feed in the future if you could prevent that loss. So I'm going to talk a little bit about pests and diseases. You all know about the stories of pests and diseases in the Bible and other religious texts. Plague of locusts, very well known. We still get plague of locusts now, and they still cause as much damage as they ever did. Literally millions and millions of these insects going and devastating crops. All pests and diseases in Europe today, even with all our modern agricultural methods, are responsible for up to a quarter of everything we grow is still lost. Some parts of the world in bad years can lose everything, and then you get famine. So how do we protect them? And I'm going to spend the next wee while talking about protecting our crops to see if we can save some of them. There are three main things I'm going to talk about: pesticides, resistance, and biocontrol. First of all, pesticides. Pesticides were first documented about 2,500 years ago, the time of the pharaohs, where they discovered that using elemental sulfur on their crops protected it from pests and diseases. In the 1500s, Henry VIII's time, I asked somebody, one of you guys, to listen out for me talking about Henry VIII because it's a big hobby of mine. In Henry VIII's time, they were using arsenic, mercury, and lead to protect their crops. Does anybody have any suggestion what might happen to people that protect their crops with this and then eat it? Really not very healthy. And you've probably got as many people dying from eating crops as not eating crops. But it worked in terms of crop protection. 1700s, they discovered that in certain types of plants there were products that could protect against pests and diseases. And by the 1900s, they'd identify lots of these in lots of different plants. The pyrethrum are perhaps one of the best known ones. In the 1940s, they discovered that by manipulating some of the chemistry within these natural pesticides, they could make them better. They could make them more active, more efficient, or break down better in the soil. So the fact that they're synthetic, they're artificial, actually means they might be better than some of the early natural ones. And It's really important, if you take home any message from this, to appreciate that natural isn't always good and artificial synthetic doesn't always mean bad. Today we have around 1,000 active ingredients, 20,000 different products. This is a graph showing how many tons of pesticides we use a year compared to the dates. Actually, in the UK, on a global scale, we use quite a few, but we're not a very big country. America uses more, but not the most. Actually, the amount of pesticides in America has been falling for about the last 30 years. Does anybody know why that might be?
Because they've gone to genetic modification.
Exactly. So whatever people think about GM, one positive is that it means people are using less pesticides. The big problem really comes with some of the big developing nations like China, where the amount of pesticide has gone through the roof in recent years, and that's because there are a lot of people to feed, and really they need to use whatever tools they have to produce the food. So the efficiency of pesticides, it's definitely the most common. It's almost the mainstay of how we protect crops against pests and diseases. They're pretty cheap, they're pretty efficient, which means if you use them, you're quite guaranteed that they're going to work, and that's important. And then modern pesticides are more environmentally friendly, more targeted and more efficient. So manipulating them artificially doesn't mean you're making them worse. Actually, it means you're making them better. Some of the older ones aren't so good. They stick around in the soil, they get into water and can cause problems with aquatic life. You might have heard of neonicotinoids recently that they think are affecting bees and pollination. They produce carbon dioxide in the production process, and they've also found that they can affect people, especially the endocrine disruptors. So the EU and the World Health Organization are looking to ban some of the more toxic, more damaging pesticides. But if they do, we have to find some other means of protecting crops. Quite a few people say to me, why don't we just all use organic production? I have nothing against organic production. It has a niche, but it isn't all sweetness and light. For example, they don't use pesticides in organic production unless there's a particularly heavy pest or pathogen problem, and then they have permission to use pesticides. Actually, very limited number, pre-1950, on the idea that they're natural. But remember, natural doesn't always mean they're good. They use something called Bordeaux mix, and this looks blue because it is blue, and it's copper. And as we talked about heavy metals before, and people laughed when we were talking about Henry VIII and his farmers spraying heavy metals onto crops, well, that's exactly what is done sometimes in organic farming. So most of the time it's chemical-free, sometimes it isn't, and copper is quite a toxic compound. Organic farming needs to get rid of weeds, and sometimes they use flamethrowers, and these flamethrowers, of course, need to burn fuel and therefore produce carbon. They're quite unreliable. I was talking to a farmer only last year, a big organic grower, who said that even by spraying this Bordeaux mix onto his potato, he still lost the whole crop to this late blight, this Irish potato famine pathogen. So even with these chemicals, you can't stop it. So imagine if the whole of Britain, all British potato used organic growing, there's a good chance we wouldn't be eating potatoes this year, and we'd need to find something else from somewhere. It's more expensive, but a lot of us can afford it. The main thing is that you need more land, and you could need up to 50% more land to grow organic crops. It's been estimated that if the whole of agriculture was turned to organic production tomorrow, you'd need to find a piece of land, a piece of habitable land, which Australia isn't, not all of it anyway. You'd need to find a piece of land the size of Australia to produce the extra food. Given that only a proportion's habitable, you probably need 3 or 4 Australias to produce enough food. So organic, it's got its place, but it will never replace conventional production. Okay, crop resistant, really important. You don't need pesticides, or you can reduce pesticides. This one's resistant, this one isn't. This is covered in insects. We've seen the damage that insects can do on crops today. There's lots of breeding takes place, lots of traditional breeding. This is potato breeding. You can see this is just 1 out of 30 years and the effort that you have to go to select the best crop. Lots of years of field trials, but it's really commonly used to try and identify the best plant. It's not all to do with resistance. People, when they breed, have got many more things to consider than just resistance against pests and diseases. They're interested in yield, in size, in shape, in skin finish, in maturity, in dry matter colour, fry colour, chipping quality, peeling efficiency, and this is just a little list of the different things they're interested in, as well as pests and diseases. Not only that, but some potatoes are only good for salads, some for baking, some for fries, some for processing, and some for fresh. So you have to repeat it in all those different markets. So you can see that actually this is pretty well down the list of properties. This is a Chinese potato. I thought it was nice to show, just to show that different people around the world don't all eat these little round things that we do. Wouldn't it be great if we could take a variety that we really liked, I don't know, King Edward, something well known, that was susceptible to disease, and breed it and put in a resistance gene to make it resistant to a disease? The problem is we can't. They've got 30,000 genes each, and just like me and you, if you mix the DNA between these, you get a complete variation. You get lots and lots of different types of potato. Even to the stage where 2 white potatoes quite often come up with lots of different colours, and that's just one of the properties. So you can never take a variety that you really like, make it resistant. You have to start effectively from scratch, and you've got your 15 and 20 years before you get something else. And then the supermarkets might not like the taste and might not use it. This is a picture of a field with 2 different potato plants in it. The one on the outside is a late blight susceptible. That's the Irish potato famine. Late blight susceptible. The one in the middle is late blight resistant. The one on the outside is really commonly used. It's the most commonly grown potato in the UK, and it's susceptible. The one in the middle, there's one farmer, actually somewhere in the south of England, that grows it, and it's a little specialist farm that grows this. And the reason for that is that it's completely resistant to disease, but people say it doesn't taste very good and nobody wants to buy it. So we've got resistance, but it's not really any use. I'll give you another example. Russet Burbank is a variety of potato in the US. It was bred in 1902. Its blight resistance score is 2 out of 9, 9 being very good and 1 being hopeless. So it's really susceptible. In the 1930s, about 4% of the US growing area grew Russet Burbank. Now, almost half of all the potato growing area in the US grows this susceptible variety and has to cover it with literally millions of gallons of pesticide in order to protect against late blight. So why would they do it? Why do you think that we're still using Russet Burbank? Does anybody know? Yeah, well done. McDonald French fries. It's such a good variety that, but it's susceptible. So, and people do try, and there are 1 or 2 other varieties now that people use for frying, but actually Russet Burbank's still the best, and that's the one that people want for French fries. And it's susceptible, and it means we have to spray lots of chemicals. However, there is one solution to this. And what a company called Simplot have done in America is they've taken Russet Burbank exactly as it is. They've taken a gene, a resistance gene from a different potato, and they've moved it into Russet Burbank. So now you have Russet Burbank that's resistant, and therefore you're saving a lot of pesticide. This is effectively a GM plant or biotechnology plant. And so we have to think in terms of GM, whether moving a potato gene into another potato is worth saving all these gallons of pesticide that we're currently using. So we have to look at the pros and cons. Interesting, biotechnology or GM often increases yield because we have less loss from pests and diseases, and you can reduce pesticides, as we talked about. You can reduce CO2 because you're not spraying, you're not using flamethrowers and things. There's never been this has been going for 35 years, and there's never been a single case where a GM plant has caused any problems to humans or animals, which is actually almost unheard of. And there are some minor environmental impacts, but actually nothing major. And if there have been any impacts, it's down to a particular type of GM. Actually, the one that seems to cause the most problems is where you have resistance to a herbicide called glyphosate. It's not the GM that's causing problems, it's the glyphosate. So we have to think about whether we're using GM in the right way. Can you put your hand up if you've heard about GM? I think most people, everybody. I'll tell you something called mutation breeding, and when I've asked this, I'll ask the same question. Mutation breeding is where you take either chemical or radiation and you fire it at a plant and you make hundreds, if not thousands, of genetic mutations in your plant. You collect the seeds, maybe you're looking for increased yield or something. You take the seeds and you plant them, and you take the one with the biggest yield or whatever the property is. You fire chemicals or radiation at it, and then you take the seeds and you plant it again. So you do this for lots of cycles until you get the property that you're looking for. Accelerated breeding, if you like. You might know about some examples. One example is sweet corn. So if anybody's eaten corn on the cob, that's how that was generated. If anybody's ever eaten an orange that doesn't have seeds, that's how that was generated. And if anybody eats bread, there's a big chance, almost certainly, that you're eating wheat that was generated in this way. Actually, much more harmful than GM, actually, but I don't think a lot of people know about this. Doesn't hurt anything, but the perception is that it could be. Doesn't do anybody any harm. So how many people knew about this before? Some of you, quite a few of you, good, but much less than GM. Something like over 1,000 different varieties of the food we eat today is produced in this way. Doesn't do us any harm. Okay, a completely different subject, biocontrol, the use of a living organism to depress the population of a pest. Could be an insect or fungus or bacteria or virus or other things, as I'll show you. It's still very much in its infancy, and it doesn't come anywhere near to replacing pesticides. So that's important to know. One day it might. I'll give you an example of a parasitic wasp. Looks pretty scary until you see it next to a coin. Not so scary there, unless you're a pest. This is an aphid, and this parasitic wasp has gone up to the aphid. I don't like the way it's holding on to its leg, it's a bit sinister. And it's injecting its eggs inside the abdomen of the aphid because the idea is that the eggs are going to grow. This is what it looks like a little bit later. So the eggs have grown into larvae. The larvae are eating this really nice, rich food source inside this insect. When they run out of food, they're mature enough that they can burst out and they turn into adults and go away, and the cycle's repeated. Actually, it's probably the most effective biocontrol method we have so far. Works really well inside, because you can imagine if it's outside, the insects the parasitic wasps can fly off. When they're captured inside, they're much more effective. This is called a bacteriophage. It's a virus that infects bacteria, and then only certain types of bacteria. Part of my research is seeing if we can use bacteriophages as biocontrol agents. This is your bacteria. These are the viruses attaching to the side. They go in, and you get lots more, and they burst the cell open, and then they go on and infect more and more and more until they get rid of the bacteria. This is an acute type of biocontrol. You know, in paddy fields, when they grow rice, it's actually flooded. And so they've started to put ducks, this is actually in China, they've started to put ducks on the water so the ducks can eat all the insects, insect pests. So if all goes well, doesn't always work greatly, but if it does, at the end of the season, you have lots of nice rice for your dinner and you have some nice meat to go with it, so it works well. So biocontrol efficiency, the big problem with it is that it's not very reliable. It can be anything from 10 to 90%, and that's a problem because you can't afford 10% efficiency because that effectively means most of your crop's dead. Indoor and outdoor makes a difference. The ratio of your biocontrol agent to your pest makes a difference. Whether it's natural or whether you introduce it can make a difference because you can encourage natural pests, as you'll see, and the weather makes a huge difference. So it's really not as reliable, but it has potential. This is probably the biggest example of biocontrol that I could find, and this is a cane toad. In the 1930s in Australia, they were growing lots of sugarcane, and there was a beetle called a cane beetle was starting to eat the crop. And cane beetles are really hard to kill. They're really solid things, and even some of the pesticides wasn't touching them. And in Australia, they found out that in South America, there's a toad that eats these cane beetles. So maybe without too much thought, they brought some of these cane toads over to Australia to eat the cane beetles, and it worked beautifully. For the first season, they got a nice crop of sugarcane. The big problem was that the cane toads had finished all the beetles and they needed food, so they started to eat other insects. They started to eat the plant material, and they started to eat small rodents and all kinds of things. What they didn't think about was that they're natural predators, and in Australia, unlike South America, there are no natural predators for this. It produces a toxin on its skin through its back, and nothing will touch it. So it was going, and at the moment it's spreading about 50 miles every year. 50 miles it's spreading through Australia, and it's far, far bigger a problem than the cane beetle ever was. So again, natural doesn't mean it's good, and that's a really important message. Okay, a little bit about the Institute. This is where I work, the James Hutton Institute. It's the largest agri-environment institute in Europe. Beautiful location, next to the River Tay. This is the sea, and next stop, Norway. You can see the Institute here. You can see all the field trial sites that we have here. We have 2 other fully working farms to do our trials. You can see just here we have lots of glass houses where we can take our experiments from the lab into the glass houses. We have here is a fully working farm that can go and plant crops and take it from the glass house to the field. And this is an interesting building here. It's only 2 years old. It's by a company called Intelligent Growth Solutions in partnership with the Institute, and it's a vertical farming unit. And the idea is that you grow your food in trays, and you don't need natural light. You use LED lights to control lots of different properties like growth and taste and colour, etc. It has its own water supply, it has its own temperature. The idea in the future is that mainly for particularly high value crops, or maybe if we want to grow crops over winter, we can start producing it like this. And in terms of pests and pathogens, it's great because it's a fully controlled environment where you can control pests and pathogens very easily. We work on something called integrated pest management, which really means we're working on lots of different methods, including things like GM and including pesticides, to see if we can balance the different types of control so that we can find a solution that works but is also environmentally friendly. I want to take you through a few examples. This is the Irish potato famine, Phytophthora infestans. That means the plant destroyer, for good reason. It blows through the air, it lands on potato leaves. If you have the right amount of water in the right temperature, it starts to infect, and within days can completely decimate the plant. If you're going to beat a pathogen, it's really important to know what you're fighting against. So we have people in the Institute that are looking at the different types of isolates of Phytophthora. Actually, we call them genotypes because it's based on the DNA, based on the genomes. I'll give you an example. This is from 1 to 100% of the different types that we have. These are the different years, 2003 to 12. You can see in 2005, this particular type, its actual name is Blue 13. It's known all over the world as Blue 13. And it's known that actually because of this very graph that was drawn. So it's thanks to Microsoft Office using blue as a default color on this graph that everybody knows about Blue 13 around the world. It got much worse in the end of the last decade. And why is it important? Well, because we know we can measure how aggressive it is and how big a threat it's likely to be. We can see what effect the climate has, but probably most importantly, we can look at its pesticide sensitivity. And if we can show that pesticides don't work on that particular variety, when it's 80% of everything that we're going to see, it means we don't need to use those pesticides and we can target ones that are going to work. And that saves a lot of wastage and a lot of unnecessary damage to the environment. We're working with others in Europe so that we can look on geographically where these different isolates are. You can see the blue and the pink one. So the pink one started spreading more recently. In the UK, you can see a green and a brownie coloured one in Europe, but that's starting to move to the UK, and we can see which part of the UK, and we found that that responds to different chemicals. So people in that area, we can say, don't use that chemical, use this. And the last example of that is where if we know the temperature and we know the humidity, we can say, if you get that temperature and that humidity over a certain number of hours, it means that it's perfect conditions for late blight disease, so you need to spray. So we can actually tell growers when is a good time to spray. And with modern technology, we can send a message to a central resource and they can text every farmer in Britain and say, right, it's time to spray. It may be in this particular area, and it's becoming really effective. Another example of Phytophthora infestans, some beautiful cell biology images. This is the thing that killed 1 million people, more than 1 million people in Ireland. It's been labelled with green fluorescent protein. These are the hyphae. You can see on that hyphae this small protrusion in red, and these are called horstoria, and they're the parts of the infestans that push their way into plant cells, and while they do it, they inject proteins called effectors which switch off the immune system very, very effectively. What they've done here is labelled one of these effector proteins with a red protein, and they want to see where it localizes, and it's really clear from this that it's localized on the horstoria, just ready to get inside the plant. So a really nice example of where cell biology is teaching us about how this thing infects. This is not so clear in this light, but it's a lovely image. If you see here, you can see the outline of the cell in blue. You can see the Phytophthora, you see the horstoria pushing its way in where it can release the protein inside the cell. And if we know about this, we can start to look for interventions to try to stop it. We've used Blue 13 to attack different crops, different cultivars of potato. Some of them survive, which means they have resistance genes, but it can take many years to identify just one resistance gene for use in breeding. What some of my colleagues have done now, they're using genomics very effectively, something called RenSec, which is looking at resistance gene enrichment, where you can very quickly identify whole classes of resistance genes and pinpoint them exactly on the genome. And if you can do that for lots of varieties, link it to all the different genotypes of Phytophthora, you can very quickly develop a catalogue of varieties that will withstand the different genotypes that are thrown at it. We've also got a resource called the Commonwealth Potato Collection. This is 1,500 different types of potato, 80 species of potato. Basically, we only eat one type called Solanum tuberosum. many new resistance genes, and we're able to mine this resource very effectively. Onto the natural environment. This is probably an example of how not to grow crops. This is a little bit like the Irish potato famine. You've got one crop, probably one variety, nothing else. So if you get a pest or pathogen starting a problem here, it will shoot like wildfire through the whole crop, and you need a lot of chemicals to protect against this. It's much more healthy if you've got something like this, and you'll notice this is kind of more, that was abroad, this is more of a UK approach. You've got fields, you've got different things growing in your fields, you've got lots of trees, lots of natural spaces, and that's really healthy, and I'll tell you why. It's been shown that if you look at, this is increasing number of crops, and here you've got increasing number of weeds or wild plants. And you can see the more wild plants you have, the more insects you have, and that means the more natural predators that you have. So if you can encourage weeds, not necessarily in your field, but around your field, you'll have natural predators to try and control, and that can reduce spraying as well. One obvious example are field margins, and that's why almost every farm in the UK leave field margins so that they can encourage the natural predators. We've got people that work on modelling, and they're trying to model the best spatial arrangement for agricultural crops and natural spaces, including things like woodlands, so that you can balance it to get the most effective natural predation to keep the use of pesticides down to a minimum. It's also a very beautiful diagram. So each one of these squares is a different field or a different space. Okay, just a few more minutes, and I'm going to talk about something called Scotland's Plant Health Centre, which is something I'm involved in. This is a new initiative. It's a year old. And if the government or these stakeholders want information on pests and diseases, rather than going and look for different people, they can just come to us as a one-stop shop for information. We're also trying to bring different sectors together. So people in forestry and people in agriculture in the past hardly talk to each other about anything, let alone about pests and diseases. So we're trying to get them together to talk about how together we can keep pests and pathogens out of Scotland. And of course, we're working with people in the rest of the UK to keep them out of the UK. But this is a Scottish focus. Some of you heard in the practical this morning, there are over 1,000 different threats trying to come in to the UK, and we have to try and keep them out. It's a huge task. Something like 48 different threats against trees alone. We've been really lucky, some of us today. I think everybody's been lucky this week to go and see ash dieback in action. It's a nasty disease. It's affected almost every tree or every area of ash production in the UK. Came in 2012, and in just 7 years it's spread across the whole of the UK. A recent economics survey suggested that it was worth about £15 billion. It would cost the taxpayer about £15 billion going forward. That's a lot of money. That's one pathogen on one host, and we've got 1,000 pathogens on as many hosts. So potentially letting these things in is really, really serious. It's been estimated that £15 billion is about the equivalent of 50 years of trade in plants. So if you stopped the trade in plants for the next 50 years, any plant coming into the UK, it wouldn't cost any more than this. So it makes you think about the plants that we bring in compared to the damage that they can do once they're here. Another example is the emerald ash borer. We talked about that today in the practical. An absolutely beautiful but deadly insect. It's killed over 100 million ash trees in the US, over 100 million. It's now in Russia, traveling at a rate of about 25 miles a year west, which unfortunately we are. But even then, with things like trade in wood or trade in furniture that has wood in it, could very easily bring this pest into the UK, and it's a real threat. Ash dieback has already put ash on its knees. If this thing's come in, it will just finish ash off altogether. Xylella is another pathogen. We've heard about Xylella a little bit today. It's a bacteria. It's causing disease in Italy on olive trees. Over 1 million olive trees. Imagine that, over 1 million olive trees have been cut down because of it, and it's still spreading. It's spread on something called a spittle bug. This is the adult spittle bug. This is the larva, and actually some of us today saw cuckoo spit. You know, cuckoo spit in the garden. If you take the cuckoo spit and see what's inside, you'll find this quite cute little larvae, little nymph. I've said to people already, it squirts bubbles out of this end of it, and that's how it makes its case where it can mature. Matures to this, spreads Xylella. The big danger is that if it comes to the UK, it has a really wide host range, lots and lots of different plants, including trees, including oak trees, that could be affected. So we need to be really careful that this doesn't come in. You know, one of the best ways to make sure that this doesn't come in, it seems crazy, but people shouldn't bring olive trees into the UK that are grown in Italy. That's kind of really obvious. Last year, I went in one of the big supermarkets, and guess what? They were selling olive trees that they'd purchased from Italy, and they were selling them in the UK. What chance do we have unless we're really, really sensible about this? We're doing some work in the Plant Health Centre trying to better understand Xylella and how it might spread. We're looking at the climate and the best area of the climate for it to multiply and spread. We're looking at the hosts and where the hosts are in Scotland. And we're looking at things like nurseries. This is a map of all the nurseries, all the plant nurseries in Scotland. And then we're trying to overlap them all to find this region in the middle where we can start focusing our surveys, the most likely place that we're going to see a problem. We're promoting something, Don't Risk It. This is a campaign that both the Scottish and UK government are promoting, and it's talking about, unless you really have to, don't move plants around. I've noticed that half of the audience has a plant on their lap, so we'll ignore it today, and so remember this for tomorrow. It's particularly designed to be for bringing things from abroad, but actually even bringing something from here, where maybe not these, but something like ash up to Scotland could cause big problems because there's a big issue with ash dieback in this particular garden. So don't risk it. Think about it before you do it. Do I really need to bring this? And if the answer is no, then it's probably best not to. And don't buy an olive tree from a supermarket. In conclusion, can we reduce crop losses and protect the planet? The answer is it's really not going to be very easy. And going into the future, it's going to be much more difficult. We could waste a lot less. We could waste a lot less from supermarkets, but that's a small fraction of what we've got to do. Eating less meat and animal products is the best way to save the energy from crops and use that energy to feed ourselves and people in the future, although it's not easy to do. We want to reduce harmful pesticides, but we can't afford to get rid of all pesticides. And as I've already said, artificial doesn't mean it's bad. Artificial can mean that they actually work better than some of the natural ones. Keep an open mind on GM. In my personal opinion, currently GM is the only thing, the only protection method that could possibly replace pesticides now, if we had to do it now. I don't know about the future, but now that's the only option we have. So we have pesticides, we have GM, or we don't have any food. Integrated pest management is important. It's still in its infancy. We can't rely on it yet, but we're trying. And awareness, we've got enough problems dealing with the pests and pathogens we have. We don't want to bring anything else into the country. So that's it. Thanks to all the scientists that I've mentioned in my talk. I want to finish by saying one thing, and that is that this is the information for the Plant Health Centre. We've got a website that you can go and have a look at. And this year we advertised 4 studentships where people could come, or actually anywhere, and work with a scientist for 8 to 10 weeks. about £3,000 that would cover accommodation and things like this. And if you can find an academic that is doing plant pathology work that has to be relevant to Scotland, some relevance to Scotland, then look out for them next year. If you sign up to our website, you'll be notified when these things come up, and it might be of interest to you. And thank you very much for listening.